to stand, and you can be dismissed to Children's Church this morning. And while the kids are headed out, open up your Bibles with me. Turn to Mark chapter 9. We got one more. Well, you got to make enough noise to make up for everybody else. Mark chapter 9, there's a couple other places in the gospel this story is retold, but I want to look at Mark's this morning. We've spent a lot of time over the last month or so. I've been telling you to get busy. I've been telling you, challenging you to do this and do that, and talked about what the church is supposed to look like and how we go about loving the church by loving others, or how we allow others to see that we love them by seeing that we love the church. And that's a hard job. That's a busy job. Well, let's just chill out today. How about that? Could you use a little chill out? Could you use a little relax? Could you use a little sit back and deep breath sometimes? This is an interesting passage to talk about that. And you may wonder, what in the world? This has nothing to do with relaxing. Well, maybe it does. Let's dive into it and let's see. Is everybody there? Mark chapter 9. We're going to read starting in verse 2. 6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain to be alone. As the men watched, Jesus' appearance was transformed, and his clothes became dazzling white, far whiter than any earthly bleach could ever make them. Then Elijah and Moses appeared and began talking with Jesus. Peter exclaimed, "Rabbi, it's wonderful for us to be here. Let's make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He said this because he didn't really know what else to say, for they were all terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my dearly loved son. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, Moses and Elijah were gone, and they saw only Jesus with them. As they went back down the mountain, he told them not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept it to themselves. But they often asked each other what he meant by rising from the dead. What does this passage have to do with relaxing? What does this passage have to do with not getting busy? What does this passage have to do with taking a deep breath and chilling out? You ever had God appear in front of you like he did Peter and tell you to chill out? You ever opened your mouth and started speaking when you just thought you needed to, but it was the wrong time to? Yeah, is Preston in here still? I got to tell on him. Last night, I got done yesterday a little bit earlier than I expected to. And May had a dance competition this weekend in Texarkana, Friday and Saturday. And she didn't really like it when both of us can't be there. We don't really like it either. But I had the opportunity when I got home to drive to Texarkana and make it for her last several dances. So me and Preston jumped in the car and headed down. Well, on the way back, we were coming through, I think, Arkadelphia, and Preston was laid back in the seat with his iPad or with his Kindle or whatever, watching a video, and this black Dodge Charger come flying by us. I had no idea how fast he was going, but he was in a hurry. About a minute and a half later, a white Dodge Charger with a blue stripe down the side of it came flying past us. He didn't have his lights on, but he was looking for him. And I'm like, finally, somebody's around when this kind of thing happens. Well, the state trooper topped a hill, and as we came, it was Texarkana, or it was Arkadelphia. As we came to the first exit at Arkadelphia, he went into the overpass, and I saw the state trooper disappear. I couldn't see that other Charger. He was long gone. I saw the state trooper disappear. He pulled over to the side of the road, and as we went by, he got out and got behind me and pulled me over. So, and of course, Preston sees the car light up with the blue lights, and he goes, "Good job," being Preston. But he pulls us over, and I'm thinking to myself, I have absolutely no idea what I've done. Do I have a tail light burned out? I'm not the one that was doing 200 miles an hour. I don't know what's going on here. So I'm waiting, and I have my window down, and he surprised us. He came up on Preston's side, and I think it surprised Preston too. And I was thinking about this what I was preaching this morning later as we're driving on, that bright light of his flashlight, I don't think those flashlights are that bright when I use them. But my goodness, when he shines it, it lit the whole car up. And I could almost sense the panic in Preston because he was on his side. So I rolled down the window and said, good evening. And what does Preston do? What's up, dude? And I'm like, sit back. This is Peter's what's up, dude moment. He actually told us, he looked at the car and he said, I think I've got the wrong car. I said, I think you do too. You're looking for a black Charger that you missed by about a mile. He said, yeah, I think they got off there at Arkadelphia. You guys have a good night. But the rest of the way, I'm thinking of that flashlight, that big bright light, that white light like the New Living Translation says, brighter than any bleach can make it. And that moment where Peter's just, he don't know what to say, so he just says something. What's up, dude? You ever done that before? You ever done that to God? Yeah. You know, sometimes he don't want us to say anything. Sometimes he's just there. Sometimes he just wants us to relax in him and just relish in what he has for us. Robert Louis Stevenson tells a story of a ship that's being tossed around. It was in a pretty serious storm, and it was in pretty grave danger. It was not in a good place. You ever been in a ship when it was in the storms? You, I don't know, you cruise takers out there? Gets a little bit scary, don't it? I don't like being in an airplane when the storms come around, and it gets scary. The ship starts rocking to and back and forth, and the passengers were alarmed, and finally one of them, against their warning, against what they were told to do, against the orders, went up to the deck of the ship, went up to the pilot house in the ship, and as he looked up there, the captain was at the post. The pilot of the ship was at his post. He was at the wheel, and he was probably scared half to death dealing with the storm. But, you know, you're in charge. You can't let them see that you can't let them see a sweat. You've heard that before. So as the captain of the ship, as the pilot of the ship turns and looks with a reassuring smile, the passenger just gets a calm. Passenger realizes that it's going to be okay. So he goes back down to the other passengers and he makes this statement to the passengers, I have seen the face of the pilot, and he smiled, and all is well. I've seen the face of the pilot, and he smiled, and all is well. You could translate that to the Transfiguration story. Peter and James and John saw the face of the pilot and realized all is well. Can you imagine what it would have been like to be those three? I mean, they got to hang out with Jesus and do all the cool stuff. They got to see all the miracles. They got to see their names mentioned a lot right there next to him. They got to tag along and see Jesus coming into his own of who he was. Why did they need this event? They knew who Jesus was, or did they? I think their actions may say otherwise. Peter didn't know what was going on. James and John didn't know what was going on. In fact, the story tells us they were scared to death. You ever found yourself in a place where you were scared to death? Didn't quite know what was going on. Didn't quite know what to do. This is Peter. He just, thanks for bringing us here. It's good to see you. Let's build some booths. Let's build some monuments. Let's build a house for each one of you. But that's not at all what this was about. This was about seeing the face of the pilot. This was about seeing the face of God. This was about seeing the one that had created them, about seeing the one that was in charge. And then a voice comes from heaven when Peter's still talking. Peter's still doing his what's up, dude moment. A voice from heaven comes and says, this is my son. This is the one that I love, and you need to listen to him. Do you know those words ring ever true for us today? This is my son. You ever found yourself walking through the day, walking through life, trying to do the right thing, walking through life trying to be the right Christian, trying to be everything that pastor told me what I need to do to love my church, and I'm trying to do that, but yet I just don't get it. You ever find yourself there? I'll admit to you, I find myself there all the time. But can I just assure you this morning that the same son that took Peter and James and John up to the mountain with them is the same son that walks with you and me today? The same voice that said, "This is my son, listen to him," is the same voice that speaks to you and me and says, "Listen to him. I believe in him. I love him. You need to believe in him too. You need to love him too." Peter and James and John had experienced this mountaintop, had been on literally on the top of the mountain with Jesus and with God and with Moses and Elijah. Man, how weird would that be? These two guys come walking in. That might get your attention, don't you think? They were on the mountaintop. Would you just end the story right there and say, "Let me just stay here on the mountaintop. Let me just stay right here and enjoy this. Let me just stay up here in the pilot house with the captain of the ship, and let me enjoy the fact that he's got this under control. Because if I walk away from him and I go back down here with the rest of the passengers, I don't know what he's doing. I don't know if he's in control anymore." Have you ever felt that way? Wouldn't it be nice to just stay at the mountaintop and enjoy those experiences? But is that what they did? No. Their first impulse was to stay put. That's what Peter's talking about. Let's build these altars here. Let's build these houses for each of you. That implies, hey, if we're going to build a house, we're going to stay in it. Let's just stay right here. It's awful easy to get comfortable. It's awful easy to get comfortable, even when we're in God's will, even when we're doing what he wants us to do. It's awful easy to get comfortable sometimes. But that's not where he's taking us. You ever had one of those mountaintop experiences? I can think of 2 or 3 of them that, I don't know, Fridays are mountaintop experiences because you don't have to go to work on Saturday. But you know what happens sometime about noon on Sunday afternoon? You start to realize I'm on the downhill slide of the mountain and I got to go to work tomorrow. Man, I wish I could just stay up here on the mountain. Those mountaintop experiences don't have to be major life events. We deal with them all the time. But the reality of life is it's never going to stay the same. It's always going to be changing. We're always going to have to deal with stuff. We're always going to have to deal with life. But the God that's with us on the mountaintop, the God that told Peter and James and John, "Listen to my son, this is him," is the same God that's with us in the valleys. It's the same God that's with us on Monday morning at 5 o'clock when the alarm goes off and you got to go back. It's the same God. I'm thankful for the mountaintop experiences, but at the same time, I'm equally as thankful for the valleys. I've had to learn that lesson. I've had to learn that over the course of the last 5 or 6 years of life, that truthfully, if you just stayed on the mountaintop, you're going to get tired. How does a bodybuilder get stronger? They exercise. They physically wear out their body. They physically damage their body to make it stronger. How does a musician get better? You practice, you practice, you practice. You mess up, and then you practice some more. You play the guitar until your fingers are bleeding. You put Band-Aids on them and you practice some more. You play your trumpet until you can't feel your lips anymore. And then you go get some Balmex, put on it, and you keep going. How does a writer get better? You keep writing. How does an athlete get better? They keep practicing. How do you get better at being a Christian? You keep dealing with life. If we were continually on the mountaintop, how would we ever grow? Think about that. If life were continually just handed to us and we were always in this glowing, basking presence of what God is doing right now to bring us up to a place where He is, how would we ever learn to survive the valleys? We wouldn't. So they send them back down the mountain. They send him back down the mountain. Jesus, what's next for Jesus? Where is he headed from here? It's the road leading to his crucifixion. Now let's just weigh those two for just a minute. Let's forget Peter and James and John for a minute. Let's look at Jesus' side of this story. Up here on the mountain, literally in the presence of my Father. Nothing else matters right now. Do I stay here or do I leave here going to what I know is waiting on me at the cross? Which would you do? No one in their right mind would leave that experience to go down to what's waiting on them at the cross. But you know what? Sometimes it's those mountaintop experiences that are getting us ready for what's waiting at the valley. Amen? I wish the valleys weren't as deep sometimes. I wish the valleys weren't quite as long sometimes. I wish it didn't take as long to go through the valleys sometimes. I wish they didn't hurt as much as they do. And I wish we didn't have to deal with loss when we were down in there. But how much greater is the next mountaintop experience when you go through the valley? Wow. Kind of gives you something to look forward to, don't it? Peter and James and John were all sent down. Jesus was sent down. They went back down the mountain. And then they had to keep it secret. They couldn't tell anybody. Well, that's not fair. You know, we talk about sharing testimonies. We talk about sharing our witness. We talk about letting others know what God's doing in your life. But you know what? Sometimes there's those things that were meant for you. Sometimes there's those events that happen in your life. God moves in your life. That was meant for you. There's nothing wrong with claiming that. Nothing wrong with taking that. There's nothing wrong with living in that. There's nothing wrong with basking in the glow of that mountaintop experience, because you never know what the valley's going to bring. Nothing wrong with that. They had questions. They had doubts. They had concerns, but they went about doing the business of what God had called them to do. I still don't think they understood. Even though they saw the God in all of His glory, they saw the brightness, they were terrified, they were scared to death. No one had ever experienced this before. I'm still not sure they fully understood who Jesus was. But they still followed. They still went. They still did what He asked them to do. There's another story. You ever heard of Sir Edmund Hillary? He was a hiker. He was an explorer. He was an expeditionist. You ever heard of Mount Everest? Tallest mountain in the world. Sir Edmund Hillary was the first one to climb to the top of it. And it was sometime in the 50s, 1953 I think it was the day that Edmund Hillary, it was about this time of the year. I think it was in May, actually, a little bit later than now. But Edmund Hillary had met some local folks there in that region where Mount Everest is. They were called Sherpas. The indigenous people, they were called Sherpas. And he met, on his way there, he stayed with these folks for quite a while and became well acquainted with them. Became well acquainted with one of their leaders who actually became his guide and followed him up the hill and led him up the hill at Mount Everest there. And that day, they were the first two people to reach the top of Mount Everest. Now think about this. Peter, James, and John had gone up to the top of a mountain and saw God. Sir Edmund Hillary and his guide had gone up to the top of the mountain and been higher than any man had ever been walking on earth. Think about that. That's a mountaintop experience, literally. He could have stayed up there and just basked in the moment. The accolades that came after he came down from the mountain were unreal. Does anybody remember this happening? The endorsements that he got. You remember the old Sears and Roebuck? He became a spokesman for Sears and Roebuck, and his name was all over camping equipment, sleeping bags and tents and that kind of thing as an endorsement. Sir Edmund Hillary climbed Mount Everest using our product. You use our product too. He had all kinds of fame and fortune that came his way because of his mountaintop experience. He could have just retired and lived the rest of his life basking in his mountaintop experience. But do you know what he did? He didn't do that. Matter of fact, he went back. Because his mountaintop experience had opened up his eyes to something else. His mountaintop experience had opened up his eyes to something that was literally happening down in the valley. The Sherpa people, the people that lived in those villages, were a very illiterate people, were a very ignorant people. They didn't have hospitals. They didn't have health care. They didn't have the ability to take care of themselves health-wise. They didn't have schools. Their kids were not educated in any way. So instead of just basking in his mountaintop and taking all the fame and fortune for himself, Sir Edmund Hillary went literally into the valley. And he established a foundation. He established a fund. It's called the Himalayan Trust. It still exists today. It was established in 1961. And the first thing that he did when he established this was he built a 3-room schoolhouse for the Sherpa people in that village down in the valley. He established a school He established a hospital. He established education, and he established health care for these people. He did that all because of his mountaintop experience. He didn't take it for himself. He didn't just bask in that experience. He used it to do something for the kingdom that was beneficial. Think about that. What did Peter and James and John go on to do after their mountaintop experience? They were tasked with some pretty difficult things. They were tasked with putting the church on their shoulders and building the church after Jesus left. What was Jesus tasked with after his mountaintop experience? If I had that experience, there's no way I would want to go to what was in store for me. I'd want to stay there in that experience. I wonder if he felt the presence that he felt that day on the mountain, hanging there on the cross. Would that feel like the same God to you? No, probably not. But the same God that showed himself to his Son on the mountain is the same God that loves us enough to send his Son to that cross. And you know what? He was there with him that day too. Sir Edmund Hillary didn't give up on the top of the mountain. He didn't say, this is all that life has for me. I've reached the peak and there is no more. He did something with it. He took his mountaintop experience and made it better for other people. Mountaintop experiences are great. I love them. I can't wait to have another mountaintop experiences, but living, working, helping, loving in the valleys is really where the work of Christ takes place. What does all this have to do with rest? You're still telling me to work. Well, I hate to break the news to you, but the work never ends. The work never ends. Till the day that we take our last breath, the work never ends. But I want you to know something today, and I want you to rest in this, that you have absolute confidence that the same God that is with you on the mountaintop is the same God that is with you in the valley. And do you know there is no better rest that comes from knowing that? There is no better rest that comes from knowing that even though life is miserable right now, even though life is hard right now, I still have the joy of the peace that comes from the God that was with me on the mountaintop. Can you rest in that today? Now, I just want you to be honest with me. How many of you are living in a valley right now? There's a lot of hands. How many of you are on a mountaintop right now? There's nothing wrong with that either. That can change in a heartbeat. But you know what? So can the valley. It may be a steep climb to get to the mountain, but it can change in a heartbeat too. So I want you to think about something today as we leave here. Have you had your transfiguration moment? Have you had your Sir Edmund Hillary moment? Have you had your see the pilot's face moment lately? What are you doing with it? Are you basking in it? Are you enjoying it? Are you trying to hold on to it? Do you feel it sort of slipping away because the valley's sort of creeping up on me? Or are you so deep in the valley that you really can't remember how bright that light was? Are you so deep in the valley that you really don't see even the slight rise to get up to the next mountaintop? It may not be for us to see, but you know God knows. And you know He still has you in His hand wherever you're at in that journey. There's an old song that talks about that. The God on the mountain is the God in the valleys. The God of the good time is the God of the bad time. The God of the day is the God of the night. You know, He's not a God that we just come and talk about at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. He's not a God that we just read about in Bible studies and post about on Facebook every now and then. He's the same God 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and yep, that extra one on leap year, so we're good tomorrow. Don't give up in your valley. Matter of fact, relax in your valley and know that that same God is with you, and that same God will get you through. And then when the next mountaintop comes, enjoy it even more. I want you to stand with me this morning. There was a verse that kept coming up over the last 2 days that that which He started in you, He will bring to a completion. Different translations say it different ways. What if what He started in you up on the mountaintop, it can't be completed until you're down in the valley? Think about that. Their job was not done just because they got to experience the presence of God in the transfiguration. They still had work to do. Jesus still had work to do. We still have work to do. We have hard work to do. We've got a lot of work to do. There's going to be mountains. There's going to be valleys. But never, never, never forget, yes, I know I sound like a broken record. The God of the mountain is still the God of the valley. Bow with me. Father God, I know there's some pretty deep valleys in this room right now. I know there's some people that are starting to run so far downhill that they're losing their balance and they're about to start rolling and they don't know what to do about it. There's some that have been through the deep part of the valley, but the climb is getting pretty steep to get back up to the mountaintop. There's some that are standing on top of the mountain just yelling and screaming and praising you and saying thank you. All of us are at different places, and the reality is that can change so fast. And sometimes in our inability, we don't know what to say. We don't know what to make of the mountaintop experience. We don't know what to make of the valley experience, and we may step out of line, and we may have our Peter moment and try to do what we think is right. But God, I just pray this morning that wherever those valleys and mountains are today, would you just impress upon us and remind us and refresh us and give us the assurance to know that you are still with us in the valley, thus the same as you were in the mountain. Maybe even more so. Those are the times that we have to rely on you the most. Those are the times that we have to let go and say, you got this, I don't. And God, I just pray this morning that those that are in the bottom of those valleys, would you just encourage them today? Would you just give them a peace of knowing that they can still have joy in you no matter what circumstance they're dealing with in life is. And God, when they get to the next mountaintop, would you just give them the voice to scream and sing to you as loud as they can and bring blessings to them, Father. Lord, I don't know where all of us are today, but the things that I do know, there's things that are being dealt with that are pretty tough. And Father, I just pray that you'd be with each one this morning. And those that are on the mountaintop, let it last as long as it can. Let us enjoy it as long as we can. Fill us up with as much as you possibly can, so when that next valley comes, we can still rest in you. We can still relax in you. And give each of us the peace of knowing that it doesn't matter. You still got us. And Father, I thank you for that this morning. And I give you all the praise for that this morning. And we just love you. Thank you for all that you do. Before we close this morning, I just wonder if there might be one or two or maybe even more that your valley may be becoming more that you can handle.